Stop the Nazi games indeed. Hallo allemaal, daar zijn we er weer. RHTVLive. We streamen natuurlijk live vanuit het mooie Maastricht. Ja, en voor de internationale publiek laten we natuurlijk zien waar Maastricht op de kaart ligt. Ja, het ligt in het zuiden des lands. So hello to you all. We are streaming live from Maastricht, which is in the south of the Netherlands. And of course, we're going to talk politics and geopolitics. Ja, mensen, we gaan het eerst eventjes hebben over de Eritreërs. Ja, weten we nog wat er ongeveer een maand geleden is gebeurd? Rellen in Den Haag. Ja, en dat zijn we niet vergeten bij RHTV Live. Ja, en we laten straks zien wat de gevolgen zijn van de rellen van de Eritreërs. So, in The Hague we had a festival for people from Eritrea, right? It's a country in Africa. And these people were fighting. They were fighting in The Hague, right? Here we have Eritrea, where the people are from, and we're going to show some footage, images of what happened that night. Ja, we laten eerst even beelden zien van Den Haag, de afloop en ook wat er gebeurde tijdens de rellen. So we are trying to look for the video. Yeah. Chaos en rellen in Den Haag door mensen uit Eritrea. Chaos and riots in The Hague by people from Eritrea.
Grote bende in Den Haag, een dag na de rellen. De burgemeester van de stad is erg geschrokken en boos.
Ik heb er maar één woord voor: afschuwelijk.
Zo is deze bus helemaal uitgebrand en dit gebouw is flink beschadigd. Binnen was gisteravond een feest aan de gang. Daar kwam een groep mensen uit Eritrea op af die het feest wilden verstoren. Eritrea ligt in Afrika. Het is een van de minst vrije landen ter wereld. Er is maar één politieke partij en al 31 jaar is deze man president. Isaias Afewerki. Mensen die kritiek op hem hebben of op de partij worden zwaar gestraft en vaak zelfs gedood. Veel Eritreërs willen daarom weg uit het land en vluchten. Ook naar Nederland. Volgens deskundige Mirjam van Rijzen zijn zij het niet altijd met elkaar eens.
Hier in Nederland hebben die Eritrese vluchtelingen ruzie met elkaar. Sommigen die steunen het land waar ze vandaan komen. En anderen die hebben dat land ontvlucht en die zijn bang voor de machthebbers.
So this is a so-called specialist, right, who knows a lot about Eritrea. And she says, basically, there are people that support the regime and there are people that flee from the regime. And the people we're celebrating were fleeing from the regime and the people on the streets supported the regime or something like that, right? We still don't know. We don't know what really happened 1 month ago in The Hague. Ja, we hebben geen idee wat er nou precies gebeurde.
In dat land.
Volgens tegenstanders van de regering zou het feest in Den Haag georganiseerd zijn door de regering van Eritrea. Dat denken ze te zien aan de vlaggen en de teksten op de t-shirts. Maar of dat echt zo is, dat moet nog worden onderzocht. Ook is het nog onduidelijk wie de relschoppers waren.
Oh, dat moet nog worden onderzocht. Ja, we still need to investigate what really happened, right? And we're going to show you guys an article about the people from Eritrea who rioted in The Hague, right? Even zoeken. Ja, dat moet nog onderzocht worden. Ja, er moet nog onderzocht worden wat er nou precies gebeurde die avond. Maar onderzoeksraad doet geen onderzoek naar rellen Eritreërs. Nee, zijn maar zielige mensen, hè. Ja. So, when something happens in a city, something like riots and stuff like that, it's always investigated, right? Except for now. Yeah. No investigation on what really happened. Nope. De Onderzoeksraad voor Veiligheid, OVV, doet geen onderzoek naar de rellen rond de Eritreërsfeest in Den Haag vorige maand. Op verzoek van de gemeenteraad had de gemeente OVV gevraagd om zo'n onderzoek, maar de raad zegt niet bevoegd te zijn. So, the people within the councils of government wanted an investigation, but the people said we don't have the authority to investigate such an investigation. So it's really, dit is Nederland. Het is echt heel triest. Echt heel erg triest. Voorzitter Chris van Dam zegt dat de onderzoeksraad onderzoek doet naar voorvallen die de veiligheid van mensen, dieren of zaken in gevaar hebben gebracht. Een verstoring van de openbare orde valt daar niet onder, aldus Van Dam. So, they do investigate, but not this investigation because it's not really, I have no idea why there is no investigation. Waarom wordt hier geen onderzoek naar verricht? Enkele honderden tegenstanders van het bewind in Eritrea belaagden op 17 februari in een Haags zalencentrum. Voorstanders van het regime waren daar bijeengekomen. So the people partying were for the regime. The people outside against the regime, right? So that's all we know. There is no investigation. This is happening in the Netherlands, right? It's insanity. It's like insane. Every country should do an investigation when such things happen. This is the political heart we're talking about of the Netherlands, and you have some people from Eritrea breaking and causing fire and stuff like that, and they're not even being investigated. Ja, mensen, dit gebeurt in Nederland. Zeer triest dat dit gebeurt. En als je hierover uitspreekt, ja, dan ben je volgens sommige mensen bipolair. Ja, je mag niet kwaad zijn. So according to some people, you are bipolar when you are angry about the fact that there is no investigation to the people of Eritrea, right? So we are still forming a cabinet 4 months after the election. We're still forming a cabinet, and we have Thierry Baudet asking, come on guys, hurry up. Come on guys. We got 4 months and we're still at, square one. We're still talking about, how to make a coalition and, what the rules will be and, stuff like that. So Thierry Baudet has a real quick thing he has to say. And he asked, where is the formation going?
Voorzitter, het is 4 maanden na de verkiezingen en er is nog steeds niet een begin gemaakt van inhoudelijke gesprekken over nieuwe meerderheden, nieuwe coalities. Dat vind ik slecht. Dat vind ik veel te lang duren. En ook vandaag denk ik, ja, er worden wat politieke punten gescoord. Er wordt politiek met een kleine p bedreven. Maar het nieuws dat er ligt is dat er 4 partijen zijn die inhoudelijk met elkaar gaan spreken over wat ze met het land willen. Dat is prima. Laat ze met voorstellen komen. kom met een programma. Wij zullen daar inhoudelijk graag naar kijken. Maar op dit human resource niveau vind ik eigenlijk de tijd die we daaraan besteden niet waard. Ik zal dus ook niet een lang verhaal van maken. Ga aan het werk, maak er wat moois van. Als wij het op inhoud kunnen steunen, zullen we dat doen. Als we het niet steunen, zullen we daar ook inhoudelijke kritiek op geven. Maar wij zijn in de politiek ingegaan om op inhoud te spreken over het land en niet ons bezighouden met dit getit voor tet op het niveau van de poppetjes.
Maar zo makkelijk komt u er niet mee weg.
Het is een poppenkast inderdaad. Ja. Deze mensen die doen niks anders dan discussiëren, dan daarover, dan daarover, dan daarover, dan daarover. Doen niks anders dan discussiëren en ze kunnen nog niet eens tot een formatie komen. Toch triest.
Want de Bontebal heeft nog een vraag.
Ja, voorzitter, het is heel goed dat we natuurlijk geen politiek met een kleine p bedrijven.
U heeft dat anders wel de hele dag gedaan.
Het woord is aan de heer Bontebal.
Maar is het verkoop van maaltijdboxen dan politiek met een grote P?
Nee, dat staat daar los van. Dat is een van de diverse bedrijven die in ons ecosysteem tot wasdom aan het komen zijn. En ik kan het u van harte aanbevelen. U allen overigens, want ik hoorde hiervoor Esther Ouwehand spreken over misstanden in de veehouderij. Die erkennen wij ook. En ik ben bijvoorbeeld vorige week bij een slachthuis geweest. De hele keten gezien van onze geweldige dieren. Ik kreeg alleen maar gras te eten. Die worden op een hele goede manier geslacht. Ik ben er ontzettend trots op dat we dat naast ons politieke werk ook aan het opzetten zijn. Voorzitter.
So you're talking about you guys are, having politics with a small p, right? And the guy Bontebal asks if selling food packages is politics with a big P, right? So this is all happening in the Netherlands. And of course, we're also going to take a look at other places, right? The last time we talked about Vietnam, well, this time we're going to go back to Afghanistan, right? Now, we know that Zbigniew Brzezinski had made the Mujahideen, right? We know it fell apart into three factions. We have the Taliban, the Northern Alliance, and Al-Qaeda. Well, who did 9/11, huh? Who did 9/11? Oh yeah, that was Al-Qaeda, right? So this is why the West intervened in Afghanistan. The US was attacked during 9/11, a false flag state operation, right? To have a footprint in the Middle East. So Afghanistan was the target, right? Let's take a look at what's happening in Afghanistan. And we have an animation of the invasion of Afghanistan. And we're going to show you the animation. Ja, mensen, hier een animatie van de invasie van Afghanistan. Ja, weet u nog, 9/11, Amerika werd aangevallen. En ja, dat komt uit Afghanistan. Nou, we weten dat de Mujahideen is gecreëerd door Zbigniew Brzezinski. We weten dat het in 3 delen uit is gevallen nadat de USSR verdreven werd uit Afghanistan. En we weten dat het een burgeroorlog was en de Taliban de macht kreeg uiteindelijk. En de Noordelijke Alliantie vroeg om hulp, Amerikaans hulp, om tegen de Taliban te gaan strijden. En daarna gebeurde 9/11. En dit is de actie wat Amerika dus voert in Afghanistan. Ze zouden dus de Taliban verdrijven en andere terreurorganisaties zouden ze gaan verdrijven. So the mission was to expel the Taliban and other terrorist organizations within Afghanistan. That was the mission.
The dawn of September 11, 2001, signaled a monumental shift in modern geopolitics when Al-Qaeda, an extensive global extremist network, carried out a devastating attack on the United States. As a consequence, the US initiated a comprehensive effort to disassemble the organization and motivate the replacement of the supporting Taliban regime who sheltered Al-Qaeda in the war-torn region of Afghanistan. I'm Griffin Johnson, the armchair historian, and today we will be delving into the American intervention in Afghanistan. Following the attacks on it was immediately clear to the United States who was behind it: Osama bin Laden, founder and leading figurehead of Al-Qaeda. For President George W. Bush and his national security advisors, their immediate response was to open up channels to bin Laden's network in Afghanistan. Attempts were made by some US officials to arrange for the extradition of bin Laden without resorting to war. The most notable among these was Robert Grenier, then CIA chief in Pakistan. On September 15th, Grenier met with a Taliban commander called Akhtar Mohammad Osmani and asked for his help in turning over bin Laden to the Americans. Osmani was convinced to ask the Taliban leader, Muhammad Omar Mujahid, to surrender bin Laden in order to avoid an American invasion. However, as Grenier began opening this channel through to the Taliban, President Bush issued an ultimatum in a speech before Congress on September 20th. He called for the Taliban to surrender bin Laden and Al-Qaeda or share their fate. A bold demand, but one empowered by Congress, who had given Bush authority to use all necessary and appropriate force against those behind the September 11th attacks. This also included any supporters of the perpetrators. Mullah Omar refused Bush's ultimatum, claiming bin Laden had not committed the attacks. As further justification, Omar cited bin Laden's oath of allegiance to him and the Afghan people's honorable commitment to protect their guests. By this time, it became clear that the Taliban were no longer willing to hand over bin Laden, and Grenier's last proposals for negotiations were dismissed and his channels to Osmani dried up. In order to tackle the war against Al-Qaeda and its Taliban supporters, the Bush administration developed 6 strategic objectives for the operations in Afghanistan, with the key focus being the elimination of Al-Qaeda and the possible capture of Osama bin Laden. The objectives would be incorporated into the wider Operation Enduring Freedom, which was all but confirmed following the deadline left for the Taliban on October 5th. In a multi-ethnic country like Afghanistan, skilled local translators were a vitally important asset during the war. And thanks to the sponsor of today's video, Speakly, you can skip the translator and go straight to learning a new language up to 5 times faster than conventional methods. Speakly gives you access to everything you need to start learning and understanding a new language today. New vocabulary words, speaking and writing exercises, listening comprehension training, and even music recommendations in the language that you're learning, so your studies will never get boring or monotonous. Speakly is the only language learning program that lets you choose your method of study, offering a writing focus, multiple choice options, or a combination of both. Speakly recently launched a brand new, much improved mobile app, which includes a new review system that shows how well you. On October 7th, the United States began airstrike operations on numerous targets throughout Afghanistan, which, in turn, rallied the Taliban to Mullah Omar and bin Laden. In order to avoid the worst of these strikes, bin Laden left his home in Kandahar and disappeared, and had his top commanders sent out of the country. Al-Qaeda was virtually dismantled, except for loyal fighters who remained on the front lines outside Kabul, while others retreated east into the mountains to await the US attack. In the meantime, other divisions within the CIA were busy enacting plans parallel to Robert Grenier's overtures back in September. Under the CIA's Special Activities Division, a paramilitary team led by Senior Intelligence Officer Gary Schroen flew to Tashkent, Uzbekistan on September 20th aboard a CIA cargo plane. 6 days later, they boarded an old Russian-made Mi-17 helicopter and were inserted into the Panjshir Valley north of Kabul. They flew in with weapons, secure satellite communications gear, GPS mapping equipment, and $10 million in boxed cash. The SAD operatives were welcomed by the Northern Alliance, who were already engaged in their insurgency against the Taliban. Led by Mohammed Fahim, Schroen's agents went to work establishing the first of more than a dozen forward operating bases across Afghanistan. The SAD worked alongside Afghan warlords and rebel armies to send human intelligence back to Langley. This included important data such as the locations of minefields and terrorist safe houses. With the stroke of a computer key, counterterrorism center staff in America could keep a record of these locations and relay them to CIA paramilitary operators to assist them with field work. Operations were being driven 24/7 from inside the CIA's Global Response Center, which secured a direct line to the Defense Department's Joint Intelligence Operations Center at Central Command in Florida. The CIA's paramilitary teams would be augmented with special operations forces from the military, such as the Green Berets and Delta Force. Despite the evacuation of bin Laden and his senior officers from Afghanistan, the US military exhausted its list of fixed Taliban targets in the first 2 nights of bombing, in which more than 100 Afghans were reported killed. By October 19th, special forces had arrived with 3 12-man teams initially deployed to the areas of Takhar, Panjshir, and Mazar-e-Sharif. More arrived within the month. The Northern Alliance had 15 to 20,000 men split between 4 commanders across 5 different locations: the Kabul frontline, Badakhshan, Takhar, Central Afghanistan, and Herat. Throughout Afghanistan, the Taliban had around 45,000 men, plus 2,700 al-Qaeda and other foreign fighters. The Taliban fighting forces were arrayed across the north, organized as fronts consisting of fighters under various commanders. These fronts faced the Northern Alliance forces near Kabul, Badakhshan, and Mazar-e-Sharif. Once the air campaign began, other cadres from the south and east were sent to reinforce their front line in Kabul. Additionally, volunteers rushed in from Pakistan, perhaps as many as 500 per day. Under the American Central Command in Afghanistan, General Tommy Franks launched a ground offensive after October 19th, shifting air assets to support the Northern Alliance in combat. With this new close air support, the CIA and Special Forces teams were working directly alongside Northern Alliance commanders.
Ja, we know what happened. We weten wat er allemaal gebeurd is. We weten het wel. Dus Afghanistan werd aangevallen door de CIA en later kwam het leger. Afghanistan was attacked by the CIA and later the army came and basically it was under one big lie, the noble lie, right? I mean, if you look at Osama bin Laden, if you read the papers, you'll see that he was caught in Pakistan, right? If you believe that, you know. War is deception, lies and deception. So, you know, even if you have video images of things happening, you don't really know what happened, right? But it enrages me to attack a country that didn't do anything to me. They didn't attack The Hague, the Netherlands, you know. But we went to Afghanistan, right? So, that's all happening. You know, it's been happening for ages. We have Julian Assange, right, giving us the tapes of Reuters journalists being killed in Iraq, and he's still sitting for that. He's still in prison for that, right? So, you know, when truth becomes fiction, then the lie takes over, right? or something like that. So we see what's happening in Afghanistan. We saw the intervention in Afghanistan, and we're also going to take a look at Afghanistan right now. Well, not right now. This was 2 years ago. But we're going to show you a video of Afghanistan after the NATO intervention. You see a lot of kids are trying to escape the reality, and they're overdosing on drugs. This was 2 years ago. So we're going to take a look at this here.
Sometimes ends a drug addict's life. Health workers came to round up the addicts and take them to addiction treatment centers, but today they encounter the lifeless bodies of 3 addicts. Here at Kabul's Pul-e-Sokta Bridge, the health workers face the grim and heavy chore of removing the bodies, hauling them up to the street and away for burial. If no family can be located, they will be laid in an unmarked grave, with no one to mourn their loss. It is the mark of shame to be buried alone in Afghanistan. For the workers and government officials, it reminds them they cannot help everyone. Dr. Aref Wafa was working with addicts.
Especially when we come here in the winter, our goal is to save their lives. They may increase the dose due to cold or chills. When they overdose, they do not feel it, therefore this causes their death.
Doctors say these addicts are consuming heroin, morphine, opium, and increasingly crystal meth. The cause of death is usually a drug overdose. They are taken to a Kabul cemetery for burial. How many bodies are buried there? No one knows. Officials don't track the numbers. Ghulam Yaya's brother lost his life to addiction under the bridge. Yaya, an addict like his brother, still lives under this bridge. Now he describes the sadness and shame and how addicts' deaths are treated by religious leaders.
They said those who use drugs commit suicide. Since they commit suicide, their funeral prayers are forbidden. They cannot be washed. His mother did not bring her child to this world to end up under Pul-e-Sokta Bridge. He did not wish this for himself, but I could not bury him in any cemetery.
In Kabul's Pul-e-Sokta area, this is
freedom for Afghanistan, right? This is freedom. People living under a bridge, trying to escape reality, overdose, stuff like that. This is Afghani freedom, right? So this was before the Taliban took power, and now they have power, and we're going to take a look at what's happening in Afghanistan. We already talked about this a couple of episodes ago, why Afghanistan and Pakistan are fighting again. This was 2 days ago, so let's take a look at this here.
Afghanistan in retaliation to a lethal suicide attack on a Pakistani military outpost over the weekend. This didn't go down well with the Taliban, who responded by firing on Pakistani positions along the border with heavy weaponry and threatening further escalation. This is just the latest deterioration in Afghan-Pakistan relations, which have been on a downward spiral ever since the Taliban took power in 2021 and basically refused to kick out the Pakistani Taliban, the main terror group in Pakistan. So in this video, we're going to have a look at the recent flare-up, the wider downturn in Afghan-Pakistan relations, and what might happen next. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So, this story really started on Saturday, when a terrorist group attacked a Pakistani military outpost along the Pakistan-Afghanistan border, in the region of North Waziristan. North Waziristan has a history of unrest, and had previously acted as a sort of home for various Pakistani terror groups, most notably the Pakistani Taliban, but the army apparently reclaimed the area a few years ago. According to a statement by the Pakistani military, the group used suicide bombs and a vehicle laden with explosives, and the attacks resulted in the death of 7 Pakistani soldiers. While the military didn't say who was behind the attack, a newly formed group, Jaish-e-Farsani-Muhammad, has since claimed responsibility for it. Pakistan's newly crowned president Asif Ali Zardari vowed to respond strongly to the attack, regardless of who it is or from which country the group came from.
Last time we talked about the mythological creature, right? And if you sever one head, 2 heads will pop out. You know, remember that? Well, this is another head of the Hydra, right? Jaish-e-Farsani-Muhammad is a new terror group.
Jaish-e-Farsani-Muhammad has since claimed responsibility for it. Pakistan's newly crowned president Asif Ali Zardari vowed to respond strongly to the attack, regardless of who it is or from which country the group came from. The army then announced that they were performing a clearance operation, but until Monday it was restricted to operations on the Pakistani side of the border. However, in the early hours of Monday morning, the Pakistani military launched a series of what it described as intelligence-based anti-terrorist operations aimed at targets inside Afghanistan, around the border towns of Paktika and Khost. Pakistani officials told Al Jazeera the attacks were aimed at the Pakistani Taliban, or TTP, who were the main terrorist group operating in Pakistan, implying this new group that claimed responsibility for Saturday's attack is just a front for the TTP. This didn't go down well with the Taliban, who criticised Pakistan for violating Afghanistan's territorial sovereignty, and claimed the attack killed 5 women and 3 children. A few hours later, there were a series of skirmishes between the Taliban and Pakistani army troops along the border, apparently instigated by the Taliban. So what happens next? Well, even if this recent episode doesn't trigger a full-on conflict, Afghan-Pakistan relations have been going steadily downhill for a few years now, and it's hard to imagine that things are going to get better anytime soon. For context, despite nominally being a US ally, Pakistan quietly maintained relations with the Taliban in the 2000s and 2010s, and even occasionally provided support for Taliban fighters. There were quite a few reasons for this, but the main one was that Pakistan rightly suspected that the Taliban might end up returning to power when the US withdrew. And
they were right. They were right. They came back. You know, it's really amazing. Let's look up something else. 2 years of Taliban, right? 2 years from the Taliban takeover. Let's take a look at this here.
A celebration of the blood-soaked peace they say they've returned to the nation. It was on these streets of Kandahar that the Taliban first emerged in the 1990s. Now, 2 years after returning to power, there is no joy in the eyes of the men lining these flag-draped roads, and of the women, there are none. August 2021, and images to haunt the players in that drama still, of people so desperate they clung to the underbellies of planes abandoning their nation. Few in that moment were more at risk than the brave female politicians who had risen and raised up the lives of every other Afghan woman too. Like Women's Minister Hasina Safi, who hoped, even when the Taliban stormed her ministry, that they were capable of the change they promised.
I had a hope. Now I was saying they have changed. As a woman minister, they may approach me. They may come to me. They may ask for my advice. What should we do?
When did you lose that hope?
I think it was 19th or 20th of August, when my security team informed me that one of the groups have decided for your assassination as a role model. at the top level so that there is fear at the bottom, and women themselves isolate them.
So this is happening in Afghanistan. The Afghani freedom, right? You call this freedom? I don't. You know, it's one occupying power that leaves, and a power vacuum exists. And the force you guys were fighting, well, we were fighting it too, right? The Netherlands also supported the US. But the forces we were fighting took power. You know, the US was like, bye-bye, bye-bye. We don't care about you Afghans, bye-bye. Live under the Taliban rule. So they are. They are living under the Taliban rule, right? And this woman isn't certain of her own life, you know? Very, very sad thing to see what's happening in Afghanistan. We will never, ever forget the lies, the perpetual lies to invade Afghanistan, right? We will never, ever forget that. We also will not forget the lies, the perpetual lies about Iraq. Remember, weapons of mass destruction? Well, George Bush says there are no weapons of mass destruction here. You know, it's really, really sickening. And we're going to show you a video clip of that too, right? It's sickening how lies prevail over a war. So here we have George Bush saying there were no weapons of mass destruction there. Nope, nope.
The weapons of mass destruction got to be somewhere. Nope, no weapons over there. Maybe under here.
Nope, no weapons of mass destruction there. Maybe under here, you know. And this guy, this washed out president, says that that Ukraine, you know, he's conflicting Iraq with Ukraine. It's really, really, oh my God. If you hear this guy. Here we have George W. Bush, known for the war on terror, right? Bungling about Putin, saying the elections are rigged and this and that. It's amazing.
Russian elections are rigged. Political opponents are imprisoned or otherwise eliminated from participating in the electoral process. The result is an absence of checks and balances in Russia and the decision of one man to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of of Ukraine. Iraq too. Anyway.
Iraq too. He admits he was wrong about attacking Iraq. You know? Really, really sad thing to see. And I was talking about the Reuters journalists who were killed in Iraq. Well, there is another Reuters journalist who's killed at the border of Lebanon. Ja, mensen. Reuters nieuws media, die heeft dus ook mensen in het Midden-Oosten. En we gaan even kijken hiernaar. Ja, we're going to take a look at this here. Israeli tank fired, killed Reuters journalist Issam Abdallah in Lebanon. So you basically have someone from the press, right, having press everywhere on his jacket, on his helmet, and stuff like that, you know, and he was fired at by a tank. Here, Reuters journalist Issam Abdullah sends a picture showing the teams setting up near a farmhouse looking south. So they're looking at Israel right now. And the Reuters team starts transmitting a live video feed pointing south as smoke fires from various positions behind hills. After more than 45 minutes of filming, the camera points to the right and focuses on Israeli outpost and tank firing into Lebanon. And less than 90 seconds later, the first 2 tank rounds fired from another hill hits the team, killing Abdullah. A second round hits 37 seconds later, setting Al Jazeera's car ablaze. This is happening, people. You know, insanity really is insane. So the Netherlands Organization for Appeal Scientific Research, DNO, as an independent research institute that tests and analyzes munitions and weapons for clients, as the Dutch Defense Ministry examined the material for Reuters and its laboratories in The Hague. DNO's key findings were that the largest piece of metal was the tail fin of a 120 millimeter tank round fired by a smooth-bore tank gun positioned 1.34 kilometers away from the reporters across the Lebanese border. So there you have it, right? And very, very long article. Here we see Abdullah looking at the border. So here you see the press, everything press, right? Pressed on the helmets and stuff. And here you see press too. So they were very, very easy to identify. And yeah, the IDF general says, nope, we don't shoot at journalists. We don't do that. Yep, that's Al Jazeera's car. Gone in an instant. So this is all happening, right? And, you know, we're just giving the truth here. Yep. So Israel is shooting at journalists and stuff like that, and the Netherlands is like, who cares? Who cares? You know, nothing happening here. So that's that, right? You know, there's so much more to tell. You guys remember that general? You know, that general who said, we're going to attack 7 countries in 5 years.
You've even gone so far as to say that in a way.
This is also a very interesting guy, Professor John Mearsheimer, who talks about Ukraine. Very, very interesting to see what this guy has to say here on the right. Let's take a look at this here.
What Russia did when it decided to invade was actually rational. That doesn't mean that we like it or approve of it, but that it was rational. Can you fill us in on your thinking about this? Because it goes to the heart of the issue I raised about whether or not those leaders after the Second World War would have been wiser in their approach to it. Maybe we've just become too smug and too slow to read real politics.
Well, I think that's exactly what happened here. I think you have to go back to the 1990s to understand what's going on in Ukraine. There was a big debate in the Clinton administration about whether to move NATO eastward, whether there would be NATO expansion or not.
Yes.
And inside the Clinton administration, there were a good number of people who were adamantly opposed to expanding NATO because they thought in realist terms. They believed that the Russians would see this as a threat. And as NATO got closer and closer to Russia's borders, it would all blow up in our face. And they fought tooth and nail to prevent it. This included people like George Kennan. It included Secretary of Defense Bill Perry, who has said he thought about resigning from the Clinton administration over this very issue. But these realists were opposed by a good number of liberals, and this included the president himself, Tony Lake, who was his national security advisor, Richard Holbrooke, and a number of others who believed that NATO expansion was a good thing. They had a more liberal mindset and thought that this would help promote democracy and economic prosperity in Eastern Europe. It would not be threatening to the Russians because they would see us as a benign hegemon and we would live happily ever after. But what happened is the realists lost, the liberals won, and we started to expand NATO. We got away with a big tranche of expansion first in 1999. That's when Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic came in. Then we got away with another big tranche of expansion in 2004. This is when the Baltic states, Romania, Bulgaria, Slovenia, Slovakia all came in. But then in 2008, the trouble started. Because in April 2008, we thought in terms of a third big tranche. And this time we said explicitly that NATO was going to bring Georgia and Ukraine into the alliance. The Russians made it unequivocally clear that this was not going to happen. And Putin made it unequivocally clear at the time that it was a move that would lead to the destruction of Ukraine. Now, very importantly, John, at the NATO summit in Bucharest in April 2008, where this policy decision was made, Angela Merkel and Nicolas Sarkozy, the leaders respectively of Germany and France, were unequivocally opposed to bringing Ukraine into NATO. And Angela Merkel has said that the reason that she was opposed was because she thought that Putin would view it as a declaration of war. So if you think about it here, you have all these policymakers and prominent individuals like Kennan in the 90s, and then you have Angela Merkel and Nicolas Sarkozy who are saying this is not a smart thing to do. And Bill Burns, who's now the head of the CIA, and in April 2008 was the US ambassador to Moscow, wrote a memo to Condoleezza Rice, then the Secretary of State, basically telling her that this is the brightest of red lines and it's going to lead to unending trouble if we continue to.
They knew. They were expanding NATO all over Europe, and they knew, right? They knew Russia would react. Now, we heard, right, Ukraine and Georgia, and a lot of people don't know where Ukraine is or Georgia. So we're going to show it on the map, right? So over here we have Georgia, and above that is Russia, right? And over here we have Ukraine. So those two countries want to join NATO, right? Who is the farthest country is Turkey, right? And Russia would be encircled by NATO countries, right? Aside from White Russia, Belarus, which is still a partner of the Russian Federation. But for how long? How long can Lukashenko still be in power? He's been in power for more than 30 years. So, How long can they stay in power, right? So you have Ukraine and Georgia, and we have Armenia, who is a partner of Russia, who feels abandoned because of the Nagorno-Karabakh situation, which is in Azerbaijan. It's a rogue state, basically, from Armenia in Azerbaijan, and they took over, and a lot of Armenians went back to Armenia, right? And Russia was supposed to be the third person in this conflict, right? They were supposed to negotiate with Azerbaijan and Armenia about Nagorno-Karabakh. But you had Ukraine, right? Ukraine. So Russia's all focused on Ukraine, and Armenia feels a bit left behind, put it that way. And they're also focusing on joining NATO. So this is all happening, people. We also have Erdogan, right? Erdogan is a leader in Turkey who's been waging war in the north of Syria and Iraq against the Kurdish people who America supports in Syria, you know, so yeah, that's happening there. Turkey also demanded stuff from Greece. There are like islands and stuff, and Turkey says, nope, that is not your island, it's my island. So there's a bickering about the islands, and you know, both countries are NATO allies, but Turkey is, you know, trying to push Greece into war. So we have that going on, right? We also covered the Israeli situation. We have some drone video from Gaza, and it's very, very sad to see what's happening in Gaza. So we're going to take a look at the drone footage from Gaza, and it is very shocking to see what's going to transpire. Gaza drone video shows killing of Palestinians in Israeli air attack. So we have 4 Palestinians walking in the deserts of Gaza, and we're going to take a look at this here. Khan Yunis area. We'll look it up. This is really sickening, right? Really is sickening. You should be ashamed of yourselves, IDF soldiers. These people are unarmed. What a world we live in, right? So the Khan Yunis area, we looked it up, and we're going to show it on the map. Here we have Khan Yunis, and it was over there somewhere in the vicinity of. So this is all happening, people, and it's sickening. It really is sickening. What a world. What a world that we live in, right? So we saw that. And this is supposed to be family friendly, but you know, this is the reality of what's happening. Very, very sad thing to see. We also stand still at the Reuters journalist who was killed by the IDF, right? We will not forget you, Isam Abdallah. We will not forget you. No, we don't shoot a journalist. No, of course not. Really, really sickening and really, really sad to see what's happened, what's transpired here. You know, here they are as a camera crew, and they see the outpost on the hill firing, you know, at their direction. So it's really is sickening. Really, really is sickening. This war must stop. Whether it's Gaza, whether it's Ukraine, whether it's Sudan, right? The war in Sudan is still waging, and we're going to take a look at what's happening over there in Sudan. Let's see if we can find some images. In Sudan, we will not forget those people, right? Because they are people too. I don't care where you're from, what color your skin is, or whatever. It's about ideology, right? Ideology. Sudan Civil War from the BBC. We're going to take a look at some images. Let's see what this is. 10 months ago. This was 1 day ago. No.
Sudan's conflict described as the war the world forgot. Civilians caught up in the country's civil war have shared graphic accounts to the BBC of rape, ethnic violence and street executions at the hands of the paramilitary group, the RSF.
We will not forget.
Shortly show you some first-hand testimonies. But before that, top United Nations officials met today, saying the war has plunged the country into one of the worst humanitarian nightmares in recent history. The UN Special Rapporteur spoke to the BBC earlier and gave us this assessment.
That it is the largest as well as the fastest displacement crisis in the world today. The needs are staggering and they continue to rise. And all the positive indicators, food security, access to healthcare, reproductive health, we see these rapidly declining. And what we see are negative indicators, malnutrition, child protection issues, access to health, and rising food insecurity. These negative indicators on the rise.
Since April last year, Sudan's been torn apart by fighting between these two men. One head up the country's military, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, and the other is his former ally, General Mohammed Hamdan Daglo.
So the left guy is from the army, and this is the Rapid Support Forces.
He leads a paramilitary group, as we mentioned before. It's called the Rapid Support Forces, or the RSF, and together they took power in 2019. But the power sharing agreement that's resulted has now broken down, and it's led to fierce fighting. Now, within Sudan lies another humanitarian crisis in the western region of Darfur, where the RSF is accused of targeting and killing non-Arabs, and there have been reports of hundreds of deaths. The The RSF have repeatedly denied any involvement in the violence in the region, and they've called for an independent international investigation. The UN says that with 8.1 million people forcibly displaced and tens of thousands killed, this could trigger the world's largest hunger crisis.
Yep, let them all come here to the Netherlands, right? Jullie zijn welkom, jullie zijn welkom in ons land. So, the last episode we showed you guys a song where people were standing inside a refugee center and, they were singing for the Syrians. So, these are Syrian people, right? According to, but later on we can find Sudanese people, Palestinians, and whatever else. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You're all welcome to come to the Netherlands, right? Because the people from Eritrea, no investigation on those people. Right? And so if you come here to the Netherlands and you create riots and stuff like that, nothing will happen. Nothing will happen. Don't worry, because the people from Eritrea, there's no investigation to those people. Nope, we're not. We don't have the authority to have an investigation and blah 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 blah. Ja, dus dit is een goed teken voor de mensen die naar Nederland komen. En ze zijn gevrijwaand van allerlei dingen. En zoiets van, het zijn zielige vluchtelingen. Straks kunnen we ook nog mensen uit Sudan en Palestina opnemen. Ja, de mensen uit de Gazastrook. Kom naar Nederland hoor, je bent welkom. Ja, kom maar. We have a housing crisis, right? The Dutch population that wants a house has to wait 10 years to get a house. But people from Eritrea, people from Afghanistan or wherever, they come here for a month and get a house and get this and get that and get this and get that. And when you are angry as a Dutch person, people say you're bipolar and you're weird. What are you talking about, man? You're weird. You get that. It's like, what planet are you on? Are you paying attention? Well, I am. And we know what's happening everywhere, right? And where is the humanitarian, feeling? People in Afghanistan are living under a bridge and aren't certain of their lives and stuff like that. It's amazing. It really is amazing. That is Afghani freedom, right? That's why we intervened. A very, very sad thing to see. We also have the Sudan war, the Gaza Strip thing going on. We got Ukraine, war everywhere you look. We are in World War III. If you define a world war as battles on many areas of the planet, we are in World War III. So we have, this going on, right? Gaza Strip. We have Sudan war going on. We have Ukraine war going on. War everywhere, man, everywhere. It's like, what the hell, you know? So we're also going to show Rand Paul talk about Turkey, right? And the fighters and stuff like that Turkey wants from the U.S. So we're going to take a look at that. We have Rand Paul talking about the extortion that Erdogan is doing towards the U.S.
Sweden's membership in NATO, then Turkey gets America's F-16s. You may remember the last time we had a famous case of quid pro quo here. Boy, everybody was all up in a lather and they said we have to impeach Donald Trump because it's a quid pro quo. Apparently it depends on what the quid is and what the quo is. Quid pro quo, though, is actually more the norm than it is actually the exception. The speakers you've seen here today were adamantly against Turkey and adamantly against them getting the F-35 because they possess a Russian defensive weapon system that may well allow exploitation and allow Americans to become more vulnerable. But now they're adamantly for it because they got Sweden into NATO. Thank God Sweden's in NATO. We can all rest easy. Rewarding Turkey, though, with the sale of $23 billion worth of F-16 fighters, though, has some repercussions, and we should think about it before we do it. I maintained that there are deep concerns about the sale, as it was initially proposed way back in 2021, and I've maintained my opposition, given Turkey's dismal human rights accord, its unreliable behavior as a NATO ally, and its disruptive military actions in the Middle East, the Caucasus, and the Eastern Mediterranean. Congress must not serve as a rubber stamp for President Biden's side deals. The quid pro quo to expand NATO should not come at the expense of rewarding the alliance's most embarrassing member. President Biden pledged to center U.S. foreign policy on the defense of democracy and the protection of human rights. But Biden's own State Department issued a human rights report for Turkey in 2022, which identifies significant human rights issues, including arbitrary killings, suspicious deaths of persons in custody, forced disappearance, torture, arbitrary arrest, and the continued detention of tens of thousands of persons, including opposition politicians, former members of parliament, lawyers, journalists, human rights activists, and even an employee of the U.S. mission. Doesn't sound like one of our best allies. The Human Rights Foundation of Turkey, a non-governmental organization operating out of Ankara, reports that some 1,130 individuals were subjected to torture and other forms of mistreatment while in custody or at extra custodial places, meaning not jail, some out-of-the-way place that no one can see where the torture happens. And this sadly also includes the torture of children. In March 2023, it was reported that a 14-year-old boy on his way home in southeast Turkey was stopped by the police with no justification. He was subsequently abducted and subjected to torture. The police beat him with their guns and, according to the boy's lawyer, tried to force him to say, "I am a Turk, a curse upon the Kurds." When he refused, the police instructed him to memorize the Turkish national anthem by the next day, threatening to shoot him if he failed to do so. The police then bound his hands and threw him into a swamp before local villagers, hearing his cries for help, rescued him and brought him to the hospital. The State Department's report also identifies, our State Department identifies severe restrictions on the freedom of expression and assembly in Turkey, violence and threats of violence against journalists in Turkey, increased censorship, criminal libel laws, and unfortunately much more. Since 2014, it is estimated that more than 160,000 people were investigated for insulting Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and more than 35,000 went to trial. Imagine if it was a crime in the U.S. to criticize the president. How many people would be in jail? Of these trials, 12,881 individuals were convicted, and 3,625 people, including 10 children, were sentenced to prison. While Erdogan is imprisoning men, women, and children for insulting him, he's openly praising Hamas. So these people come to the floor and they say, oh, we were against giving the planes to Turkey before we were for giving them, and we don't like that Turkey gives to Hamas, but we're playing real politic here because we want Sweden in NATO, and whether Turkey gives money to Hamas, we're going to turn a blind eye. That, to me, is a quid pro quo not worth taking. After Hamas's brutal October 17th attack on Israel, Erdogan defiantly claimed Hamas is not a terrorist group, it's a liberation group. You think we should be sending our best weapons to a country that said after one of the worst terrorist activities in modern history, October 7th, Hamas is not a terrorist group? Should we be sending our prized F-16s to a country that says Hamas is not a terrorist group?
So who created Hamas, right? Because, you know, it's very easy to say, oh, that's a terror group, blah, blah, blah. But who created Hamas? Now let's take a look at his father, Ron Paul, stating about Hamas, right? There we have it. Let's see if we can find it. There are many clips. Maybe we need to specify. Israel encouraged Hamas. Put it that way. Here we go. Israel encouraged and started Hamas.
The gentlewoman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Dr. Paul.
The gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Gentlelady for yielding, and I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I rise in opposition to this resolution, not because I am taking sides and picking who the bad guys are and who the good guys are, but I'm looking at this more from the angle of being a United States citizen, an American, and I think resolutions like this really do us great harm. In many ways, what's happening in the Middle East, and in particular with Gaza right now, we have some moral responsibility for both sides in a way, because we provide help and funding for both Arab nations and Israel. And so we definitely have a moral responsibility, and especially now today, the weapons being used to kill so many Palestinians are American weapons, and American funds essentially are being used for this. But there's a political liability which I think is something that we fail to look at, because too often there's so much blowback from our intervention in areas that we shouldn't be involved in. You know, Hamas, if you look at the history, you'll find out that Hamas was encouraged and really started by Israel, because they wanted Hamas to counteract Yasser Arafat. And you say, well, yeah, that was better then and served its purpose, but we didn't want Hamas to do this. So then we as Americans say, well, we have such a good system, we're going to impose this on the world. We're going to invade Iraq and teach people how to be Democrats. We want free elections. So we encourage the Palestinians to have a free election. They do, and they elect Hamas. So we first indirectly and directly through Israel help establish Hamas. Then we have an election. Then Hamas becomes dominant, so we have to kill them. You know, it just doesn't make sense. During the 80s, you know, we were allied with Osama bin Laden. And we were contending with the Soviets. It was at that time our CIA thought it was good if we radicalized the Muslim world. So we financed the madrasa schools to radicalize the Muslims in order to compete with the Soviets. There's too much blowback. there's a lot of reasons why we should oppose this resolution. It is not in the interest of the United States. It's not in the interest of Israel either.
Well, there you go. Now you know who created Hamas, right? And if we look at another intervention in 2014, right? The Gaza Strip was attacked again, and we will see that the general states that it's not about Hamas. It's about the Palestinian gas, right? So here we go. IDF's Gaza assault is to control Palestinian gas to avert Israeli energy crisis. Right? This was 2014. You guys remember this? So the former general says in 2007, a year before Operation Cast Lead, Yalon's concerns, that's the general, focused on the 1.4 trillion cubic feet of natural gas discovered in 2000 off the Gaza coast, valued at $4 billion. It's not about Hamas. It's not about, getting these Hamas terrorists and stuff. It's not about that. It's about Palestinian gas, right? That's what it's about. We know that Netanyahu was not in power anymore. There were new cabinets in Israel, and they came and fell, and many elections thereafter, Netanyahu got in power again, and basically this happened. We also have the West Bank settlements on fire by Israeli settlers. And I'm not against Jewish people. I'm not against anyone. I'm just showing what's happening here. So we're going to look at the West Bank that was set on fire by Israeli settlers. Wait. So just type in West Bank fires, and you'll see Israeli settlers set fire to cars in West Bank. So we're going to take a look at this here. Not only cars.
هجوم قطاع المستوطنين على أهل الجبل. حرق البيوت وحرق السيارات. ابعد عن السيارات، ابعد عن السيارات يا جماعة الخير. ظنيت أحد آنية مين هذيك السيارة شغالة كيموها. ابعد عن السيارة. ابعد عن.
They don't care if someone is in the car. They don't care. So, whose side are you on, right? Both are wrong, but whose side are you on? Very, very sad thing to see what's happening in and around our beautiful planet. So, we're going to take a break, and we will be back tomorrow. So I hope you guys are paying attention. I certainly am. So we're going to take a look at this political snake here, Boris Johnson, who was at the London riots. Back then he was a mayor of the London boroughs, and there were riots over there. And we're going to take a listen to this here.
Salon selected. Let Boris speak. Let Boris speak.
I just want to say thank you to everybody who's come out here today to volunteer to help clear up the mess of last night. Thank you. You are the true spirit of this city.
In the streets of London, the peace has been disturbed. Fires burning everywhere, the language of the unheard. There's a generation thwarted with no ownership and pride, and fat cats with bellies as wide as the rich and poor divide. A broken social contract, bottom up austerity. Oh, we can condemn it, but we're paying attention now, aren't we? Blame it on the hoodies, blame it on the feral youth. But remember, you were young once and you cared about the truth. We sold out to the free market, made a couple of billionaires, and all we got was this mess and McDonald's everywhere. Keep unemployment high, keeps the cost of labour low, keeps young men out on the streets, and well, what do you know? Down to Dixon's, you can take some stuff for free. You can get an Apple Mac and a high-def TV. But if you work in Canary Wharf in a bank too big to fail, there's much better looting going on, and you don't have to go to jail. Steal from a generation for the pockets of a few, but it can only go so far, and you're paying attention now, aren't you? Of London, the peace has been disturbed. Fires burning everywhere, the language of the unheard. There's a generation thwarted with no ownership and pride, and fat cats with bellies as wide as the rich and poor divide. A broken social contract, bottom up austerity. Oh, we can condemn it, but we're paying attention now, aren't we? Blame it on the hoodies, blame it on the feral youth. But remember, you were young once and you cared about the truth. We sold out to the free market, made a couple of billionaires, and all we got was this mess and McDonald's everywhere. Keep unemployment high, keeps the cost of labour low, keeps young men out on the streets, and well, what do you know? You head down to Dixon's, you can take some stuff for free. You can get an Apple Mac and a high-def TV. But if you work in Canary Wharf in a bank too big to fail, there's much better looting going on, and you don't have to go to jail. Steal from a generation for the pockets of a few, but it can only go so far, and you're paying attention now, aren't you?
Are we paying attention? Are we really paying attention? Let's put a cherry on the top, right? Ja, laten we even George Galloway zien, die een hele belangrijke speech heeft. George Galloway blasts warmongers. Let's take a look at this here, and then we're going to close off. And of course, when Galloway speaks, Parliament is empty. You see, people hate hearing the truth.
On that surreal note, let me quote Rudyard Kipling. We don't want to fight, but by jingo, if we do, we've got the men, we've got the ships, and we've got the money too. There's plenty of jingo, Madam Deputy Speaker, but of course the men, the ships, and the money are more difficult to find. Some of the fantasy talk in this debate, I genuinely hope, is widely seen by the general public. It was a Gilbert and Sullivan performance as they first conceded that our weaknesses are such we need to conceal them in the report. That's what the Right Honourable Gentleman for Rayleigh said in an intervention. We've had to conceal the extent of our weaknesses in this report. No, I won't. I'm mindful of the Deputy Speaker's injunction that she's fast running out of time, and I don't intend to take my whole 13 minutes. Don't worry, I'll make sure people see the Right Honourable Gentleman's performance. We need to conceal the extent of our weakness, and then he adumbrated our weakness. And if that wasn't our total weakness, if there are weaknesses that he concealed from that list, then I ask myself, why on earth are these people pirouetting in this Parliament about which enemy they're going to fight, in which theatre of war, when they don't...
Point of order, Mark Francois.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll keep this very brief. For the record, the gentleman opposite has traduced me. He's literally said directly the opposite, as Hansard will show, of what I actually said.
Thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for that point of order. I think he's used it to make his point, but I will return to George Galloway.
Pomposity, but not a point of order. The Right Honourable Gentleman said we were careful to conceal some of our weaknesses, and then he adumbrated those weaknesses, and if there are more that he concealed, we're in very big trouble. But my point is this: we haven't the men, we haven't the ships, we haven't the money. So why are we picking enemies? I've lost count of the number in the course of this debate that we are either already fighting or may have to get ready to fight. That's the absurdity, the Alice in Wonderland nature of this debate. We can't retain even the low numbers of people that we recruit. Why? We ought to know why. The lions don't much like the look of the donkeys that lead them into war after war, which they later disown and admit should never have been fought. You know, Madam Deputy Speaker, to what I refer. I had a debate in the Oxford Union. The then Defence Secretary ran away, didn't turn up. I had to deal with his subordinates. But I made the point there. I was a boy soldier, Royal Artillery Battery 2, Army Cadet Force. I trained with the Royal Marines for weeks in Dorset. I am in no sense a pacifist. I want to defend our country. I want our soldiers to be properly paid, properly housed, properly clad, properly trained, properly armed. I've picked up Tommy Atkins, you know, stricken with addiction, from Piccadilly Gardens in Manchester, just out of strange ways, addicted to spice, abandoned by the politicians that gaily sent them off to one needless, pointless, fruitless war after another. Don't come here and say you're standing up for Tommy Atkins. It's the donkeys that sent them to wars that even those donkeys now disavow.
Such as George Bush, right? George Bush said, Iraq, he confused Ukraine with Iraq, but he also said, yeah, that was wrong. It was wrong of us to do so. Millions and millions of lives are on the chessboard, right? And who will be next to be sacrificed as a pawn? Well, I will not be the one next, right? I am aware. I know what's happening in and around the world, and so do you now. We want peace. That's what we want, not war. We've had enough of war. So we're going to end the stream, and we will be back on Sunday, and we'll see each other